The rain had been falling since noon, and by the time the Ravenscroft carriage came down the Holt Road at speed, the ruts had filled and run together into a single sheet of moving water that hid the edges of everything. Dallow, who had driven that road in every season for 19 years, did not see the figure until the horses were nearly upon her. There was a cry, half his and half hers, the long shriek of the brake, and the offside wheel struck her a glancing blow that threw her down into the mud at the verge. The horses came round hard. A bandbox burst open against the stones and scattered its contents into the dark and the wet. A folded shawl, a prayer book, 2 letters that the rain took at once and pressed flat against the road. She did not scream. That was the first thing Dallow would say afterward in the kitchen to anyone who would listen. She went down without a sound, and she came up onto one elbow without a sound. And when he scrambled from the box with the lantern shaking in his fist and held it over her, she looked up at him with an expression he could not name. Not terror, not rage. She looked, he said, like a woman doing sums. "My ankle," she said. "I believe it is turned, not broken. If you would help me up, I should be glad to get out of the road before something else comes along it." Nothing else was coming along it. Nothing sensible was abroad on such a night. But Dallow took her meaning, and he got an arm beneath her, and between them they raised her to standing on the one good foot, and she swayed and put her hand flat against the side of the carriage and steadied herself by will alone. "Whose house is nearest?" she asked. "His Grace's, miss, the Duke of Ravenscroft, not half a mile." "Then I think we had better impose upon his Grace," she said, "since the alternative appears to be drowning." They left the ruined bandbox where it lay. There was no retrieving the letters, the road had them. She let Dallow hand her up, and she sat very upright in the corner of the seat with her soaked cloak gathered about her and her bound foot held still, and she did not weep and she did not faint, and when the carriage lurched, she set her teeth and said nothing at all. Her name was Phoebe Wren, and she was 24, and she had been practical for so many years that she had long since lost the seam where practicality ended and she herself began. Her father had been a gentleman of small means and smaller sense, and when he died 8 months past, he had left 3 daughters, a quantity of debt, and a house that belonged, it emerged, rather more to his creditors than to him. Phoebe was the eldest. There had been no question of who would manage it. She had managed it as she managed everything, by looking at the whole of a bad situation without flinching, and then doing the next necessary thing, and the next, until the situation was less bad. She had found her sisters lodging with an aunt in Bath who could be persuaded to charity if it were not called charity. She had sold what could be sold, and she had written in a clear, unhurried hand to every respectable household within reach of her connections, until one of them, a Mrs. Ferris of Northamptonshire, elderly and widowed and wanting a companion, had answered yes. It was the only door that had opened, and so she had walked through it. She had taken the cheapest coach as far as it would carry her, and meant to walk the last of it if she must, because there was no money for anything else, and because she had grown used to there being no money for anything else. She had been on that road, in that rain, because the door to the rest of her life stood in Northamptonshire, and she had been going toward it on foot. Mrs. Elliot, the housekeeper at Ravenscroft, was a sensible woman who had run the great house through the long bachelorhood of its master, and was not easily startled. She had her startled when Dallow carried in a drowned and muddy young woman and set her down in the small parlor off the hall. But she recovered at once, as good housekeepers do, and within the half-hour Phoebe was dry and warm and seated by a fire with her ankle bound in strips of linen and her wet things steaming on a horse before the grate. "You will stay the night," Mrs. Elliot said in the tone of a woman who has decided a thing. "There is no help for it. The road is gone by now, and you cannot be moved, and His Grace would not hear of it. Drink the broth." "I am very much obliged to you," said Phoebe, and drank the broth. Then she said, "How long does the Holt Road generally remain impassable after rain of this kind?" "A day, 2 if it keeps on." "And has word been sent to Mrs. Ferris at Hartwell, near Brackley?" "She expects me. She will be uneasy if I do not come, and uneasiness is hard on a person of her years." Mrs. Elliot, who had not expected the drowned young woman's first concern to be the nerves of an elderly stranger 40 miles off, said that word should certainly be sent the moment the roads allowed. Phoebe thanked her again, with the same exact courtesy, and asked whether she might trouble her for a needle, as she thought she might mend the tear in her cloak while it dried, and there seemed no reason to waste the evening. It was at this point that the Duke of Ravenscroft came home. Hugh Seaton was 32 and had been Duke for 11 years, and in the whole of that time he had not once been surprised by a woman. He had been pursued by a great many. He had been flattered, courted, deferred to, laughed at on cue, agreed with before he had finished speaking. He had watched young women arrange their faces into modesty as he entered a room and arrange them out of it again as he left. He was not a cynical man. Cynicism took an effort he could not be troubled to make, but he was bored in a manner so total and so long-standing that he had ceased to recognize it as boredom. He thought it was simply how the world was, a performance got up for his benefit by people who wanted things, in which he was obliged to play the part of the audience. He came in wet and ill-tempered, having heard from the groom that there had been an accident on the road and a person taken into the house, and he expected a scene. He expected tears or reproach or, worse, gratitude pitched too high. He pushed open the parlor door fully prepared to be managed. The young woman by the fire looked up from her sewing. She had a needle in her hand and her foot on a stool, and her hair, drying, had begun to curl at the temple in a way she plainly had no thought for. She regarded him with a perfectly steady and perfectly civil attention, the way one might regard a man who had come to read the water meter. "You will be His Grace," she said. "I'm sorry to be such a quantity of trouble in your house. Your coachman was not at fault. I was on the road in the dark and the rain, and no one could have seen me. I hope he has not been blamed." Hugh stood in the doorway with the rain running off him and found that he had no idea what to say. "He has not been blamed," he managed. "I'm glad of it. He behaved very well afterward. Mrs. Elliot has been kindness itself. I shall be gone the moment the road permits. I have a position waiting in Northamptonshire, and I would not wish to keep it waiting longer than the weather obliges. I only wanted to thank you properly, since it is your roof, and I did not know when I should have the chance." She said all this without one tremor of self-pity and without one flourish of bravery either. She was not suffering at him for his sympathy. She was not being composed at him for his admiration. She was simply telling him the relevant facts in their order of importance, and the relevant facts did not, apparently, include any wish to be pitied or any wish to be praised. He had not heard a woman speak to him in this way in 11 years. He had not, he thought, heard anyone speak to him in this way. "You are hurt," he said. "My ankle is turned. It will mend in a week with rest. I have no intention of resting it for a week, but it will mend regardless." She bent her head to the cloak again. "It is good of you to ask." He came into the room. He sat down across from her, which startled Mrs. Elliot far more than it startled the young woman, and he began to ask her questions: where she had come from, where she was bound, what the position was, how she came to be traveling alone on foot in such weather, and she answered them. She answered every one of them plainly and exactly, neither concealing the smallness of her circumstances nor performing the smallness of them for effect. Her father had died. There had been debts. Her sisters were provided for, after a fashion. She had found respectable work and was going to it. There was nothing in it, her manner said, to weep over and nothing to admire. It was simply what had happened and what was being done about it. He found, somewhere in the first hour of that conversation, that the thing he had been calling the way of the world had a name, and that she had given it to him without meaning to, and the name was boredom, and it had lifted clean off him for the first time in years, simply by being in a room where no one was performing anything. He did not sleep much. He sat up late in the library with a glass he did not drink, and turned the evening over in his mind. And by the gray of the morning, he had decided what he meant to do, with the same lack of hesitation that had always governed his decisions and that he had never before had the smallest occasion to question. He sent for the parson. Phoebe received this intelligence from Mrs. Elliot at breakfast with the same equanimity she'd received the news of the impassable road. She set down her cup. "The parson," she said, "Mr. Hervey, from the village. His Grace has sent the gig for him. Is someone ill in the house?" "No, miss." "Has someone died?" "No, miss." Mrs. Elliot, who had her own suspicions and could not credit them, found she could not say more and busied herself with the chocolate. When Hugh came in, Phoebe was waiting for him with the air of a woman who has decided to be reasonable about another person's confusion. "Your Grace," she said, "I think you may have taken a chill last night on the road. The night air after such a wedding is treacherous. Mrs. Elliot tells me you have sent for the clergyman. If you are feverish, I am sure he is a comfort, but I wonder whether a physician might not answer better." "I am not feverish," Hugh said. "I have sent for Mr. Hervey because I intend to marry you, and one requires a parson for the purpose." There was a silence. Phoebe looked at him for a long moment. "That," she said, "is preposterous. I am entirely aware of it. You met me yesterday, in the dark, covered in mud. I'm aware of that also. You know nothing whatever about me." "I know a great deal about you," he said. "I have spent 11 years learning to tell the difference between what people show me and what is true, because almost no one has ever shown me anything true, and you have done nothing but, since the moment I came through that door. I knew within the hour. I sat up the whole night to be certain I was not deceiving myself, and I am not. You may believe me impulsive. I assure you I am not. I have never done an impulsive thing in my life, and I have begun to suspect that has been the entire trouble with it." Phoebe set both hands flat on the table, in the manner of a woman approaching a column of figures. "Then, let us be practical," she said, "since you claim to value it. I am a gentleman's daughter, which is to say I have the rank to make the thing not quite a scandal and none of the fortune to make it sensible. I have nothing. Less than nothing. I have debts, or my father's debts, which amounts to the same. I have a position waiting in Northamptonshire that I have given my word to take, and a widow expecting me who will be left in difficulty if I do not come." "I shall write to Mrs. Ferris," Hugh said, "and explain, and find her a companion she likes better than she would have liked you, and settle a sum on her for the inconvenience. The debts I shall pay. They will not signify. I have 2 sisters. Where are they? In Bath, with an aunt who keeps them out of duty and lets them feel it. Then they shall not be kept out of duty any longer. They shall be settled and dowered, and need feel nothing from anyone." He paused. "Have you any further objections of substance, or are we down to the ones you do not believe yourself?" She very nearly laughed. He saw it cross her face and be put down again, and he found he had been watching for it. "Your family," she said, "your friends, society, the whole of the world that knows who you are and will want to know who I am. You cannot simply pick a woman off a muddy road and present her as the Duchess of Ravenscroft and expect the thing to pass unremarked. I do not expect it to pass unremarked. I expect it to be remarked upon a very great deal, and then I expect it to be forgotten, as everything is, when the next thing happens. My family's opinion is not a thing I permit to govern my decisions. It has not governed one of them in 11 years, and I do not propose to begin with the most important." He leaned forward. "You called me impulsive. I tell you again that I have never been impulsive in my life, and I find this morning that I wish very much that I had begun sooner, because I appear to have wasted a great deal of time being careful about things that did not deserve the care, and I have no wish to waste any more of it being careful about this." Phoebe was quiet for a while. Outside, the rain had stopped and a thin, watery sun was finding its way across the breakfast table and onto the backs of her hands. "I will not say yes to you this morning," she said at last. "It would be a foolish thing to do, and I have made it a rule not to do foolish things because I have never been able to afford them. But I will say this. Let me stay a week. Mrs. Elliot will see that it is all entirely proper, and you may send for that aunt of yours, who I do not doubt exists and will have a great deal to say, for I should like to hear it. Let me see the house and the people in it, and how you are when you do not know I am watching. And at the end of the week I will tell you whether I believe you. That is the most I will promise, and I think it is more than most women in my position would have the sense to." "Done," said Hugh, and he meant it, and Mr. Hervey was sent home in the gig with his fee for his trouble and his curiosity entirely unsatisfied, which he bore, being a Christian, with tolerable grace. The week mattered, exactly as she had known it would. She saw the house. She let Mrs. Elliot show her over it, room by room, and she asked the questions of a woman who had run a household on nothing, and now found herself looking at one run on a great deal. Not greedy questions, not the questions of a woman pricing her good fortune, but the questions of a manager. How many indoor servants and how many out? Whether the linen was got locally or sent for. what the kitchen gardens grew and what was bought in and why. Mrs. Elliot, who had braced herself to dislike the muddy young woman the master had lost his head over, found within 2 days that she could not, because the young woman knew the difference between a question that helped and a question that merely showed off, and asked only the first kind. She saw the people. She saw Norris the steward, a careful gray man who managed the estate's affairs and its tenants and its accounts, and she did not attempt to manage him, nor to flatter him, nor to go round him. She asked him to explain how the thing worked, and then she listened, and Norris, who had expected to despise her, came away from the interview telling Mrs. Elliot that Her Grace, he was already calling her Her Grace, having decided the matter privately, had more sense in her than the last 3 he could name put together, and would do. And she saw Hugh when he did not know she was watching, which was the thing she had asked for and the thing that decided her. She saw him with his tenants, patient where she had expected hauteur. There was an old man on the home farm, a tenant of 40 years named Cood, whose roof had failed in the wet, and Phoebe came round the corner of the barn unseen and stood and watched the Duke of Ravenscroft listen to him, really listen, hat in hand in the drizzle, asking after the man's wife and the man's beasts in the precise place where the thatch had gone, and giving no grand promises but only the plain assurance that Norris should have the matter in hand by the week's end. The old man did not bow and scrape. He spoke to his landlord as one careful man to another, and the landlord answered him in kind, and there was in the whole exchange no audience and no performance, only 2 men and a bad roof and the rain. Phoebe went away again before either saw her, and she thought about it a long while. She saw him with his books and with his dogs, and once, through a window, alone in the long gallery, standing before the portraits of all the careful Setons who had gone before him, with an expression of such weariness that she understood, all at once, the whole of what he had told her at breakfast about wasted care. He had not the smallest idea she was there. He was not performing. There was no one to perform for. And she found, watching him, that she believed him. Lady Harriet Seton arrived on the 4th day. She was Hugh's father's sister, and she had been managing the family's reputation, as she conceived it, since before Hugh was breached. She did not scream. She had never in her life raised her voice. She considered it a confession of weakness. She arrived in a traveling carriage with 2 maids and an expression of perfect serenity, kissed her nephew's cheek, expressed her delight at the improvement in the weather, and within the hour had made it understood, without one word that could be quoted against her, that a gentleman's daughter discovered on a road in the rain was not, and could not be made into, a Duchess of Ravenscroft. Her method was implication. She did not insult Phoebe. She asked with warm concern after the health of Phoebe's family, and let the silence that followed do the work. She did not forbid the match. She spoke gently to neighbors and connections of the great pity it was that dear Hugh had always been so impetuous, and let them carry the seed away to plant it themselves. She managed assumptions the way Norris managed the estate's drainage, quietly, expertly, so that the result appeared to be simply the natural lie of the land. She was very good at it. She had had 30 years' practice and had never yet been beaten. Phoebe watched her with something close to professional admiration. She recognized in Lady Harriet a woman who had also looked at a whole bad situation without flinching and then set about altering it by the next necessary thing and the next, and who had been doing it so long that she too had lost the seam between the method and herself. Phoebe did not hate her. She found she could not. But she had no intention of losing to her. The climax came on the 6th day, at a small dinner Lady Harriet herself had proposed, innocently, she said, only a few neighbors, only to give dear Hugh's guest a little society before she traveled on. It was a trap, and everyone at the table who had any wit knew it was a trap, and Phoebe knew it best of all. It was sprung over the question of the household. Lady Harriet, turning the conversation with the ease of long habit toward the management of a great estate, observed to the table at large how very particular the running of Ravenscroft had always been, how its hospitality was a byword in 3 counties, how it required, she smiled at Phoebe here with great kindness, a hand long trained to it, not a thing, she was sure dear Miss Wren would agree, that could be picked up in a week. And she turned, smoothly, to address some point about the still room directly to a neighboring lady over Phoebe, around her, as though Phoebe were a chair that had been left too near the fire, beginning to answer, on Phoebe's behalf and in Phoebe's presence, the question of whether Phoebe could possibly do. Hugh set down his glass. "I beg your pardon, Aunt," he said. He was not loud. He had Lady Harriet's own gift, it seemed, of not needing to be. "You were asking Miss Wren a question about the household and then answering it yourself. I should like to hear her answer. Miss Wren, you were saying?" And he turned to Phoebe and waited with perfect quiet for her to continue. It was nothing. It was the smallest thing in the world. But the whole table felt the floor shift, and Lady Harriet felt it most of all, because she understood precisely what had been done and precisely how little could be done about it. Her nephew had not contradicted her. He had not defended his guest, which might have been turned into a quarrel and a quarrel into a scandal. He had simply declined to let her speak in Phoebe's place. He had handed Phoebe the floor and made it impossible to take back without an open rudeness that Lady Harriet was far too skilled to commit before witnesses. Phoebe took the floor. She spoke briefly and exactly about the still room and about the linen and about a question of the home farm's accounts that she had got from Norris 2 days before, and understood better than half the table. Not to show off, never to show off, but because she had been asked and it was the truth, and the truth was the thing she always reached for first. She spoke for perhaps 2 minutes. When she had done, the neighboring lady said with real warmth that she could not remember when she had heard the thing put so sensibly, and the seed Lady Harriet had spent 4 days planting died quietly in the ground where it lay. Lady Harriet did not make the mistake again. She was far too intelligent to need telling twice. She finished the dinner with perfect graciousness, retired, and lay awake a long while, as the defeated do, recasting the whole campaign and finding, to her great annoyance, that there was no version of it she could have won, because the girl was not pretending, and you cannot expose as false a thing that is simply true. At the end of the 7th day, Phoebe came to Hugh in the library where he had sat the first night, and she found him there, alone with a book he was not reading. "I have stayed my week," she said. He rose. "You have? And you wish to know what I have decided?" "I find," he said, "that I wish it more than I have wished for anything in 11 years, and that the wishing is a most uncomfortable sensation to which I am wholly unaccustomed, and I should be obliged if you would put an end to it." "Then I will," said Phoebe. "I believe you. I did not at breakfast on the morning of the parson. I thought you a man in the grip of a fancy that would pass. I do not think so now. I have watched you when you did not know it, which is an unfair advantage, and I took it deliberately. And there is no performance in you when there is no one to perform for, and that is the only thing I have ever wanted to know about any man. So, yes, send for Mr. Hervey again, and I will be sorry to have wasted his journey the first time, and you may tell your aunt that she fought very well, and that I hold nothing against her, for I should have done exactly the same in her place." Hugh crossed the room to her. "You are," he said, "the most extraordinary woman I have ever met." "I am the most ordinary woman you have ever met," said Phoebe. "That is precisely the point. You have only met extraordinary ones, and they exhausted you. Now, sit down, and let us be sensible about the settlements, because I will not have my sister's futures decided in a transport of feeling, and you owe me at least a quarter hour of practicality before we give the rest of it up to sentiment." He laughed, really laughed in a way Mrs. Elliot, passing in the corridor, had not heard from her master in the whole of her service, and he sat down, and they were practical about the settlements for very nearly half an hour, and then they were not practical about anything at all. They were married 3 weeks later, when the banns had been read in the village church by Mr. Hervey, who had the satisfaction at last of his curiosity and his fee together. The position in Northamptonshire was respectfully declined. Mrs. Ferris wrote back a kind and shaking-handed letter to say that she quite understood, that she could not in conscience wish the new Duchess anywhere but where she was, and that she had in any case found a companion in a curate's widow who suited her admirably and never argued, which Miss Wren, she begged pardon, her Grace, had always seemed to her a young woman inclined to do. Phoebe kept the letter. It had been, after all, the door that opened, and she did not forget the doors that opened for her. The sisters were settled and dowered and removed from the aunt in Bath, who felt the loss of their dutiful resentment more than she had expected to. The debts were paid and forgotten, and Lady Harriet, finding herself with no choice and being far too sensible to spend the rest of her life in a battle already lost, adjusted, slowly, and then, in time, with something approaching grace, because Phoebe ran the great house so well that there was simply nothing in it to fault, and Lady Harriet had never in her life been able to resist a thing competently done. They became, the two of them, not friends exactly, but allies of a wary and respectful kind, two women who recognized their own method in each other and had the wit not to waste it fighting. When Lady Harriet sat in the Lord's Gallery the following season to hear her nephew speak, for the Duke had grown unaccountably interested that year in matters of agricultural relief, the tenants having found in the new Duchess a sympathetic and well-informed ear, she sat beside Phoebe, and they did not speak much, and they understood each other entirely. There were years after that. There is no hurrying them, and no need to. The thing about a marriage made in a single night and tested over a single week is that the rest of it is not a test at all, but only the long, quiet living out of a thing already known to be true. And there's very little in such a living out that makes a story, because contentment, thank God, is dull to read of and very fine to have. A daughter came first. They named her after no one in particular, which both of them privately enjoyed, the houses of Seaton and Wren being equally crowded with names worth not repeating. She had her mother's steadiness and her father's way of going quiet before he laughed, and she was, by the testimony of the entire household, a most undramatic and contented child, which her parents took as the highest possible compliment to themselves. And several years on, a soft gray morning, rain again, the first heavy rain of the autumn drumming on the windows of the morning room, Phoebe sat with her sewing and her foot tucked under her and watched the water run in the ruts of the drive, and thought, as she sometimes did when it rained like that, of another road and another night, of a bandbox burst open in the mud, of a folded shawl and a prayer book and 2 letters the road had taken. She had been going toward the rest of her life, that night, on foot, in the cheapest possible way, because there had been no money for any other, and because she had stopped expecting that there ever would be. She had been struck down in the dark by a thing she never saw coming. And she found, looking back at it across all the comfortable years, that she could not bring herself to regret one moment of it. Not the rain, not the mud, not the turned ankle, not the ruined letters, not even the long, sensible life she'd been walking toward and would never now lead. Hugh came in, shaking the wet from his coat, and saw where she was looking and knew, the way he always knew now, what she was thinking of. "You are thinking of the road," he said. "I am thinking that I was very nearly a companion to an elderly widow in Northamptonshire," said Phoebe, "and that I should have been an excellent one, and that I am exceedingly glad I am not." Dallow still cannot speak of it without going pale. Dallow was not at fault. I have told him so 100 times. He knows it. He simply cannot forgive himself for the best thing he ever did. Hugh sat down beside her and put his hand over hers where it lay on the half-mended seam. "I have something to tell you that the doctor told me first, which I consider a great impertinence on the doctor's part. He believes there is to be another, in the spring." Phoebe was quiet a moment, looking at their 2 hands together on the cloth. "A son, perhaps," she said, "or another undramatic daughter. I find I do not mind which." "Nor I." She turned her hand under his. "I've wondered sometimes whether I ought to be sorry for the woman I would have been, who never had any of this and never knew she was missing it. She was a perfectly good woman. She would have been kind to Mrs. Ferris and dutiful to her sisters, and she would have grown old without ever once being surprised." "And you do not envy her peace?" "No," said Phoebe. "I find I do not. She was never struck down on a road in the rain by a thing she did not see coming. And I have come to think that is the only way the best things ever arrive. Not because we walk toward them sensibly, but because they came out of the dark and the wet when we were going somewhere else entirely, and knocked us clean off the road we had chosen, and left us sitting in the mud with everything scattered, doing sums until we looked up and saw what had actually happened to us." Outside, the rain came down on the ruts of the drive, the same rain, the only rain there ever is, and inside the morning room it was warm, and the seam was nearly mended, and neither of them, then or ever, could bring themselves to regret a moment of any of it. There are people for whom the practical life is a wall they have built against ever being surprised again, brick on careful brick, because surprise has only ever meant loss. And there are people who learn, late and against all their training, that the wall keeps out the good as surely as the bad, that the only road worth being on is the one where something might still come at you out of the dark and change everything. The stories on this channel are for the second kind, and for the first kind who would like to become the second. They arrive here, like a stranger met by accident on a dark road in the rain, and never, ever regretted whenever they are ready.